There is a certain automobile that has cemented its place in enthusiast minds in a way that no other car has ever accomplished. A model that's so infamous, so polarizing, that no matter whether you're a lover of Italian sports cars, American muscle, JDM, or anything in between, just the name of this car evokes emotions and opinions like no other quite matches. The Yugo. It was May of 1984, and automotive entrepreneur Malcolm Bricklin was in a bind. He had attempted to import Fiats into the US, but his venture was not taking off as expected. So, facing bankruptcy, he traveled the world to find his savior car. Malcolm found himself in communist Yugoslavia in a parking lot of the Belgrade's Hotel Intercontinental, where he finally found his salvation, a Fiat-based hatchback called the Yugo. So Malcolm had a business partner, Tony Simonera, and both of them went to tour the Yugo Factory. Now, at the time, Yugoslavia was a combination, a merger of a bunch of different countries: Croatia, Montenegro, Bosnia, Slovenia, Serbia, I might be missing one, but they were a combination of all those countries. And today, Yugoslavia no longer exists. So in its place where the Yugo factory once stood, it's now Serbia. And when they went to visit the factory, they came up with a plan to homologate these cars and sell them into the US as the cheapest car available at that time for the low price of $3,990. Now, the factory at the time, it was not called the Yugo Factory, it was Zastava. And the funny thing about Zastava is they also built machine guns. So the car has a very interesting history behind it. So even though it was a communist car sold into Reagan's America, it actually sold very well at first. So sending them to America, selling them here started in 1986. And in the first year, they sold over 36,000 units here. But as the production went down the line and jokes were being made about the car, production and sales dropped. So by the last year of production in 1991, they only sold a little over, I think, about 1,100 units into the US. So when these cars were first sold into the US, they really did well at first. And for the low price of under $4,000, people were lined up to buy them. But they soon became like the butt of comedians' punchlines because trim pieces would fall off, and basically they were made to be cheap cars. So the interior is plastic and cloth and aerodynamic, but I mean, it's funny because they were built to be cheap cars. You can't expect the interior to be leather, chrome, and wood when you're literally buying what is marketed as the cheapest car in the US. So the big problem, and part of the reason that the Yugo got a bad name, is because they were so inexpensive, they would be kind of beaten up and not maintained. And with any car, if you don't do any maintenance, they're not gonna work for you forever. So if you put 100,000 miles on the clock without maintaining your car, it's gonna blow up. It's just, that's how it is with any car. But you know, if you spent under $4,000 on the car and a belt service or a service is gonna be $400, people would rather just run them into the ground than maintain them. And it's a stark contrast in the US to Serbia. So here in the US, there's not a whole bunch of Yugos left. Whereas in Serbia, there's still tens of thousands of them on the road. And there's a couple reasons for that. So first, the Serbian mentality was a lot more hands-on, where they would maintain the cars themselves. So a lot of the cost of service is labor in just about any car. And the guys in Serbia would just do the service themselves. And they were actually known, the Yugo was known to be a car where apprentice mechanics would learn on them because they were so easy to work on and affordable. And the parts, especially in Serbia, were readily available. So they were a good learning tool for a lot of upcoming apprentice mechanics there. So these cars in Serbia have a whole different kind of label on them as a affordable, reliable driver versus here in the US where they're known as the worst car in the world. One of the reasons that it's called the worst car in the world is, so some people reported, some American Yugo inspectors who went back to the factory to see the production line, reported to see workers smoking on the factory line and taking shots of brandy and getting in and out of the cars with dirty clothes and dirty shoes. And if you think about it, there's a huge difference between the very crisp and organized factories here in the US versus a communist country's factory line. And Zastava, the factory, they initially started building the machine guns, and then they started building cars in the 1930s for the Yugoslavian Royal Army, and it was out of necessity. It wasn't because they wanted to build these beautiful machines, it was because they needed cars. So the way they were built was to function, to get you from A to B for the cheapest possible way. And when buyers in the US heard the rumors of people smoking and drinking on the assembly line, which is just something that you wouldn't ever have happen here in the US. And, buyers would have like the window roll down handles fall off or little trim pieces like that fall off. And then comedians would make jokes, and some of them are actually quite funny. So one comedian said, how do you double the price of a Yugo or the value of a Yugo? By filling the gas tank. Or another guy said, why does a Yugo have a rear window defroster? To warm your hands while you're pushing it. So, but nobody wanted to be driving a car that was the butt of everyone's jokes. So it just fell in popularity here in the US. And I mean, they were cheap cars, but honestly, I've driven it around and I can say it's not the worst car in the world. By no means is it the best car in the world, don't get me wrong, but it has not met my expectations in the terms of the worst. I thought I'd be driving along and a wheel would fall off or it would just stop or something like that, and it gave me no issues. Nothing went wrong the whole time driving it around. So, and that's a lot more than I can say for some of the other cars I've driven that have left me on the side of the road more times than I can count. Whereas this one got me all around town with no issues. So I gotta give it props for that. So this was a 2-owner car, and the license plate on it still has the sticker, the date tag from 1995 when it was last driven before it was parked. And the car was only driven 67,000 miles. So when my husband got this car, it still did have the original belt on it. And that's a big issue with these cars because they were so cheap. A lot of people didn't want to do the belt service. And just like Ferraris, the Yugo needs a cam belt service. So that's a lot of the reason why they were known as unreliable, because they were commuter cars. So people would drive the heck out of them and never do the belt service. And so if the belt snaps, then the engine just implodes and it's a bad deal. And because people never maintain them properly, that was one of the biggest things that caused issues. So it's cool to have this belt, the original belt, because it says made in Yugoslavia on it, but that was one of the first things he did when we got the car. Was basically it had been sitting so long, so if any car you get has been sitting since 1995 or 96, you're gonna do all the service work on it. So fluids, belts, brakes, all that kind of stuff, tires, new tires, and driving it around. It was a blast. It wasn't fast, but it was a lot of fun. Probably the most famous story of a Yugo was when a Yugo was supposedly blown off a bridge and killed its driver. And as horrifying as that is, the actual story behind that was there was super high winds, but the lady driving the car was going 3 times the recommended speed limit during high winds, which was 20 miles an hour on that bridge, and still speeding above the normal without winds 45-mile-per-hour speed limit. So after an investigation, it is concluded that basically she lost control because she was speeding and there were the winds, and ended up hitting the side and getting launched over the bridge. So it's not like she was putting along and a breeze came by and it just blew the car over the side of the bridge, but that's kind of the story that has stuck in people's minds, is a Yugo just got randomly blown over a bridge. And so it's stories like that, you know, that one being the most prominent, but those kind of stories that have stuck in people's minds and made the Yugo such kind of a polarizing car throughout the years. So at first, the cars were definitely pretty primitively put together, and the whole trim pieces falling off and all that stigma around it was mostly in the earlier cars, because at that time they were still just continuing. It's built off the Fiat 128, and they had been built before Malcolm and Tony took over and started importing them to the US. So they started, Malcolm and Tony started implementing more quality control in the factory. And so the first cars were definitely the less kind of reliable ones, but it is widely agreed that the later cars, 1988, like this one, to 1991, were the better quality cars. They started doing things like basic things, but they finally started doing things like doing rust coatings, anti-rust coatings under the paint and under the underneath, and better facets for the trim pieces. So that cut away a lot of the issues that the earlier cars had with trim pieces falling off and rust and things like that. So cars like this one, which are an 88, don't have any rust. The seats are still in good condition. The trim doesn't fall off while I'm driving it. And I mean, it held together, you know, it's before I drove this car, I had this vision of driving around and a hubcap would fly off this way and a bumper would go off that way, and none of that happened. It drove like any other commuter car would. It's not fast, it's not dripping luxury, but it definitely made me smile driving it around. And especially when compared to the other cars on the road, looking over and seeing, you know, I'm in Newport Beach, so when I'm bopping around the road, and I look over and there's luxury Mercedes and Audis and, you know, supercars and all that driving by, and I'm in the Yugo. It just made me smile. So, you know, it's the quality definitely went up at the end of the production. And one more fun, interesting little thing. So this is a GVL. Their base model was the GV, and GV stood for good value. And GVL stands for good value luxury. So it's a more luxurious version of the Yugo, which is not a word I would use with Yugo, but you know, that's what they called it. All right, so I've shown you guys in the past Ferraris that come with the books and the tools and all the Ferrari branded wrenches and stuff like that. Well, the Yugo has the same kind of thing, and this car just, it makes me giggle and it makes me happy. All right, so first, we do have the original belt that came with the car, and it even says made in Yugoslavia on it. And then it has a little light bulb kit that says Yugo on it, which is very cute. And then it also has the tools, the little tool kit that comes with it. And the tools are not extensive. The 330 I filmed yesterday has this giant tool roll with everything you could need. This just has a couple basic things. It also does have a spare tire in the front with a jack kit underneath, which is really nice. But this one, it has the little wrenches, and they even say Yugo on them, which I think is the cutest thing. I mean, the Ferrari ones say Ferrari on them and the Yugo ones say Yugo. And it doesn't get better than that. So obviously this video is about our splendid Yugo, but I cannot ignore that fabulous Gulf livery GT40 that was running around with us. So a huge thank you to our friend David for bringing the car out when my husband proposed the idea for the opening shots with his car and the Yugo kind of playing together. He agreed, and I can't thank him enough. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who want to see more about the GT40, so he said I could do a YouTube video on his car in the future. So definitely stay tuned for that, subscribe to the channel, and that will be coming eventually, I promise. But the best part of all this, could you imagine that a Yugo got pulled over for street racing a GT40? Because that's a thing that happened to us today. And we weren't breaking the law. We didn't actually speed. I don't know if the Yugo really can speed. I mean, it goes faster than, the 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, but it's about 80 mile an hour, like 86 mile an hour top speed. But we had a lady who got very upset with us because my videographer had his camera out the window and me and David were kind of just in each lane and we're going the speed limit, but apparently she thought that that was unacceptable and called the cops on us. So we got pulled over in a Yugo for street racing a GT40, which I can just check that box off my list of amazing things that has happened to me in life. And it's the highlight of my day so far. So let's get into some details on this Yugo and then stay tuned for more details on that amazing GT40. Obviously the Yugo is not something I normally deal in. It's not something I had vast knowledge in. So I did a little research when the car came in. And it's funny because I found that there's like a die-hard cult of Yugo fans, which just cracked me up. I mean, it seems like there's a little niche for everyone and everything. And while after driving it and being around this car, no, I have not, become a part of the little Yugo cult, but I definitely don't think it's the worst car ever made. Is it the best? No, not what I'm saying. But I mean, it seems like a reliable little car to me. We had a lot of fun in it and it did everything right. It is very slow. Most definitely. The steering wheel kind of, in idle will shake a little and it has all the plastic bits. And I mean, it's definitely a primitive and cheaply made car, but it is just driving down the street in a Yugo was so much fun. And I really enjoyed it in making this video. Obviously, I mean, we had a little fun with the GT40, so how can you not enjoy that? But the car has grown on me a little, where, no, I'm not trying to like hype it up, but it's not a horrible car. It's a fun little car, and even the body, which is pretty much an aerodynamic brick, has grown on me. It's like they're known for not having a pretty body, they're ugly, but after a while, and because the car is so hated on, it grows on you, almost like those wrinkly, ugly little Shar-Pei dogs. So ugly they're cute, and you end up just loving them. So that's kind of what this car has done to me. It got me from A to B with no problem, and it just gave me a bunch of giggles and a fun time. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I know I had a whole bunch of fun filming it. So if you like this, please subscribe and stay tuned because we got a lot more content coming very soon.